4 red velvet chairs in the front row stared back at me, colder and crueler than any judgment I had ever heard in my life. On the backs of the chairs, laminated signs reading "Reserved for Family" sat undisturbed, isolated, like a sick joke amidst a sanctuary filled with white lilies. The scent of the flowers was so overpowering it made me nauseous. It didn't smell like a wedding. It smelled like a funeral. A funeral for my last hope of having a family. I stood there, gripping my husband's hand tight, but my eyes couldn't leave that empty space. I had checked my phone 12 times in the last hour. No text messages, no calls about traffic, no explanations. Just absolute silence. That silence wasn't just thoughtlessness. It was a sentence. They didn't just simply not show up. They chose to be absent to punish me for daring to succeed without their permission. 1 week later, that silence was broken, but not by an apology. I was standing in my glass-walled office on the 40th floor looking down at downtown Seattle, where skyscrapers reflected the cold steel of the gray sky. On the wall-mounted TV, the financial news was running a bright red ticker. Sterling boutique hotel chain hits $100 million valuation, the rise of Evelyn Sterling. The applause of my staff echoed outside the glass doors, champagne popping to celebrate the biggest victory of my career. But in my blazer pocket, my phone vibrated with a single pulse, a text from Arthur, my father. No congratulations, no remorse about the wedding, just a single command, dry as a desert. Family dinner at 7 p.m., important matter to discuss. In that moment, I understood everything. They didn't want to celebrate with me. They smelled money. They wanted a slice of the pie they once called a fantasy. I turned off my phone screen, my reflection on the black glass becoming sharp and cold. Did they think I would go there like the obedient daughter of the past, begging for scraps of affection? Mistake. I would go, but I wasn't bringing gifts. I was bringing a death warrant for their rotting empire. Before I tell you exactly what I did when I walked into that room and made them regret sending that text, leave a comment below, letting me know what city you're watching from and what time it is there. I really want to see how far this story travels. Hit that like button if you're ready for the naked truth. My name is Evelyn Sterling. To the neighbors in the suburbs of Madison, our house looked perfectly normal. A manicured lawn, a creaky porch swing, and the artificial scent of cinnamon apple pie wafting from the kitchen window. But inside, it wasn't a family. It was a miniature solar system where we were all forced to orbit a single sun. Arthur, my father. Arthur ran a chain of old roadside motels he called Sterling Legacy. He spoke of those carpet mold-infested rooms with the reverence a man should have for his children. I used to think it was passion. Later, when I was old enough to understand financial statements, I realized it was possession. He didn't love business. He loved the feeling of control. And he taught us that love was a limited currency, only dispensed when we served his ego. My mother, Martha, was the enforcer of silence. She never raised her voice. Her weapon was guilt. Every time I wanted to rebel, she would use her watery eyes and trembling voice. "Your father is under a lot of pressure. Don't worry him. Be grateful." After years of this, you stop wondering why your gratitude is always measured by your silence and submission. Then there was Julian, my older brother, a perfect clone of Dad's arrogance but completely hollow. He believed real value lay only in bricks and land. "Your hotels are just a virtual trend," he once sneered when I opened my first location. "Real business doesn't need a shiny brand." He said this while standing in front of one of Dad's motels, where the vacancy sign flickered frantically like a dying fly. And Leo, the youngest, who drifted through life as if the world owed him a soft mattress. He called himself an investor, even though the only investments he made were spending the family's money on dead-end projects. To survive in that suffocating cage, I learned to be invisible. I wore neutral clothes, hid my business books, and never wore expensive jewelry. I shrank myself so their fragile egos wouldn't feel threatened. I spent my youth playing a faded supporting role in their delusions of grandeur, while silently cleaning up the financial messes they left behind. They look at my perfectly tailored silk suit now and think success came to me as an inheritance. They know nothing of the real price. They don't know about the bone-chilling winter nights I spent curled up in a beat-up Honda Civic parked behind a supermarket, breath turning to mist on the windows, because rent was a luxury I dared not dream of. I didn't build this empire from lunches with partners or handshakes in air-conditioned rooms. I learned every millimeter of the hospitality industry with blood and tears, from using my bare hands to unclog toilets at 3 a.m. to standing in the middle of a dusty construction site bargaining for every penny with contractors who looked down on me. The fear of losing everything was always stalking me like a hungry beast, waiting to swallow me whole before the name Sterling Boutique could even form. But when I tried to share my first small steps, a new lease, a 5-star online review, Arthur just scoffed. He sat reclined in his frayed leather chair in a smoke-filled office, waving his hand as if swatting a fly. "Your model isn't sustainable, Evelyn," he judged with the condescending tone of a man who never left the comfort zone of the 80s. "Too modern, too much digital nonsense. Real business needs land, needs bricks people can touch, not apps on the internet." He didn't understand that while he clung to rotting bricks and dying neon signs, I was building a perfect operating system. His contempt didn't kill my dream, it forged it into steel. The peak of cruelty wasn't the scolding, it was the calculated absence. My wedding day should have been the start of happiness, but it became a funeral for my last illusions of family. I sent the invitation 6 months in advance. I lowered my self-esteem, swallowed my pride to call my mother, begging her for one single thing. Just for one day. Don't come as judges or debt collectors. Come as a family. She cried, saying she would try to convince Dad. I believed her, the stupid faith of a child still longing for a pat on the head. But when the organ music swelled, signaling the ceremony, the 4 seats in the front row remained empty. The shiny gold, reserved for family signs reflected my loneliness. Guests started to whisper. The pitying looks directed at me were more painful than 1,000 knives. I clutched my phone inside my wedding dress, waiting for a text about a car breakdown, an emergency, any excuse to justify this absence. Nothing. The screen stayed black, and then, scrolling through social media, I saw it. A photo Julian posted 30 minutes prior. Dad, Mom, Julian, and Leo were sitting at a cheap golf course, laughing with beers in hand. The caption read, "Relaxing Sunday with the most important people." In that moment, something inside my chest shattered. Not the sound of a heart breaking, but the clean snap of a chain. They weren't busy. They didn't forget. They chose. They chose a mediocre afternoon over the most important day of my life to prove their power. That without Arthur Sterling's permission, my happiness was meaningless. I turned off my phone, threw it in my bag, and walked down the aisle with my head held high. I didn't cry. Tears are for those who still have hope. As for me, I was done with them. A week after the empty wedding, my world exploded, but in 2 opposite directions. On financial news, the name Evelyn Sterling was praised as a new icon of success. $100 million valuation. An unimaginable figure for the girl who used to sleep in a car. The office was filled with flowers and congratulations, but amidst the bright smiles of my staff, I felt like an imposter standing on a hollow stage. Sarah, my right-hand assistant and the only one who knew my past, walked into the conference room. She didn't bring a celebratory glass of wine. In her hand was a tablet and a grave expression I rarely saw. "You need to see this, Evelyn," Sarah said, voice lowered. While you're hitting the front page, Sterling Legacy is sinking. She swiped the screen. Not praise articles, but public legal filings. Arthur's motel chain was dying. 3 mortgages overdue. A long list of unpaid contractors threatening lawsuits. And worst of all, a foreclosure notice from the bank scheduled to be executed within 30 days. The brick-and-mortar empire my father was always so proud of was now just a rotting corpse propped up by denial. Right then, my phone buzzed on the glass table. A text from Arthur. Family dinner at 7. Important matter. No congratulations. No asking how I was. The timing of the text wasn't random, it was brutally precise. They weren't calling because they missed me. They were calling because they smelled the blood of prey, and that prey was my wallet. I looked down at the text, then over at their debt records. A cold, emotionless smile slowly appeared on my lips. They want an important discussion? I told Sarah, my eyes sharp. Fine. Get the car ready, and Sarah, call the bank holding their debt. I want to buy it all. Sarah looked at me like I had grown a second head. You're going to pay off their debt? After everything they did? She asked, voice full of disbelief. I shook my head, slowly flipping through the thick pages of bad debt files. No, Sarah. Charity is when you pull someone out of the abyss. This is business. I'm not paying their debt. I'm buying the right to decide their fate. We called the bank holding the Sterling Legacy mortgage. To the bank, my father's motel chain was just a financial tumor, a bad debt they wanted to cut off as fast as possible. When I offered to buy the entire debt through an anonymous subsidiary named Vanguard Holdings, they almost sighed in relief. No long negotiations, no hesitation. Within 3 hours, the electronic signatures were complete. Legally, Arthur Sterling didn't owe the bank anymore. He owed me. I looked down at the freshly printed documents in my hand. This wasn't the bailout check they were expecting. This was a collection summons, a foreclosure notice, and eviction rights, all neatly packaged in a luxurious black leather folder. I stood up, walking to the window. Sunset was falling over the city, staining the sky red like diluted blood. Arthur wanted an important discussion. He wanted to play the power games of adults. Fine. I would show him the difference between someone delusional about power and someone who actually holds it. I turned to Sarah, my voice ice cold with no emotion. Cancel tomorrow morning's meeting and prepare my black suit. Tonight, I'm not going to dinner with my parents. I'm going to meet my debtors. I stood before the large mirror in my private dressing room at the office, staring at the woman reflected there. The old beige sweater and modest flats, the uniform of submission I usually wore whenever I went home to avoid bruising Dad's fragile ego, were now in the trash. Instead, I draped myself in a jet black silk blouse and a sharply tailored Armani suit, an outfit that exuded cold authority. My hair, usually worn loose and messy, was now pulled into a high bun, revealing the diamond earrings I bought myself after my first $1 million deal. This wasn't an outfit for a family dinner. This was a uniform. The girl who used to shrink away and apologize for existing was dead. The woman looking back at me wasn't coming to beg for love. She was coming to execute justice. Sarah walked in, clutching the black leather folder, her face tense but determined. "Are you ready, Evelyn?" she asked quietly, a hint of worry in her voice. I took the folder from her. It was heavy, not because of the paper, but because of the absolute power it contained. "Let's go," I replied curtly. The sleek black Maybach pulled up to the entrance of the Madison Country Club, the last bastion of vanity my father clung to. Warm yellow light spilled from the French windows, smooth jazz drifting through the night air, creating a perfect facade of luxury. But I knew better than anyone, inside that glamour were hungry wolves, waiting for the prey named daughter to walk in. The valet took my keys with a respect Arthur had craved his whole life, but never truly earned. I walked through the heavy oak doors, my heels clicking on the marble floor, sounding as sharp as a judge's gavel. Sarah walked right behind me, acting as a silent witness. Tonight, there would be no lies whispered in the dark. Everything would be exposed naked under the brightest crystal chandelier. The waiter led me into a private dining room where the air was thick with the smell of expensive wine and complacency. Arthur sat at the head of the table like an old king trying to cling to a rotting throne. Martha sat to his right, fingering a string of fake pearls, her eyes puffy from crocodile tears that had been well rehearsed. Julian and Leo sat opposite each other, both leaning back in their chairs with the lethargy of men who had never broken a sweat to earn a living. When I walked in, no one stood up. Arthur just waved his hand toward the empty chair at the end of the table, the spot furthest from him, the spot for the subordinate. "You're late, Evelyn," he said, not bothering to look up from the menu. "Sit down, we don't have all day." No congratulations on the company, no apology for the wedding, just the familiar condescension. I pulled out the chair and sat down, my movements slow and calculated. Sarah stood silently in the corner of the room, still clutching the black folder like a harbinger of doom. Julian sneered, swirling the wine in his glass. "Heard you hit the jackpot, huh? $100 million valuation? Probably all virtual money on paper, right? But it doesn't matter. Virtual money or real money, you still have a responsibility to the family." Martha leaned forward, her voice trembling on cue. "Evelyn, you know how hard your father worked to build sterling legacy. The market is so tough right now. We just need a little working capital support. Call it a bridge loan, just about $2 million. An investment," Leo cut in, mouth full of steak. "You should feel honored Dad is letting you buy in." They stared at me, 4 pairs of eyes ravenous like vultures circling a carcass. They didn't see me as a daughter or a sister. They only saw a walking ATM. I didn't answer immediately. I let the silence spread through the room, heavy and suffocating. I looked at each face, memorizing this naked greed. A minute passed. The sound of silverware hitting porcelain was jarring. Arthur began to lose patience, his face turning red. "Well, are you mute?" he shouted. "I'm giving you a chance to redeem yourself for neglecting your family." That was when I signaled Sarah. Sarah stepped forward, placing the black leather folder onto the glass Lazy Susan. The dry thud sounded like a hammer hitting a coffin, cutting off all noise in the room. Arthur stared at the gold-plated logo on the cover. Vanguard Holdings. He frowned, confusion starting to creep into his cloudy eyes. "What the hell is this?" he growled. "An investment contract?" I took a sip of wine, letting the bitter taste spread in my mouth before answering. "No, Arthur. This isn't an investment. It's a debt collection notice." I opened the folder, spinning it toward them. First page, Certificate of Debt Assignment. Second page, Notice of Loan Default. Third page, Foreclosure Decision. All effective as of 4 p.m. today. "You people want a bridge loan?" I said, my voice terrifyingly calm. "But the sterling legacy ship isn't just sinking. It has hit the bottom. The bank was set to liquidate you next week. I'm simply the one who bought the knife from their hands." Julian snatched up the paper, hands shaking uncontrollably. "Vanguard Holdings? Is you? You bought our family's debt?" "Correct," I replied sharply. "Legally, I am your sole creditor. And I am not an easy creditor." Martha's face went from red to sheet white. "Evelyn, you can't do this. We are family." "Family?" I laughed, a dry laugh with no warmth. "Family are the people who sat in the front row at my wedding. You people are just acquaintances who share DNA." I pulled a smaller envelope from my jacket pocket, placing it on top of the black folder. Inside was a check. "This is the only way out," I said, locking eyes with Arthur. $200,000, enough for you to pay off personal debts and retire in some shabby apartment. In exchange, you sign over full ownership of the motels and vacate the premises within 30 days. Or, I paused, letting the silence choke them. Or I shred this check, and my legal team proceeds with foreclosure tomorrow morning. You will be on the street with absolutely nothing. Arthur looked at the check, then at me. The arrogance in his eyes shattered, replaced by the raw terror of a man realizing he had lost everything. Arthur stared at the check on the table as if it were a death sentence. His hands trembled violently, not from anger, but from the powerlessness of a dictator stripped of his crown. Martha sobbed, her cries echoing in the VIP room that now felt colder than a morgue. Julian and Leo sat motionless, faces drained of blood, parasites realizing their host was dead. I didn't wait for an answer. I didn't need their approval. I stood up, smoothed out my suit jacket, and turned to walk away. The sound of my heels clicking evenly on the marble floor was the only meaningful sound in that room. When Martha tried to rush after me, intending to cling on with belated tears, Sarah stepped in to block the door, coldly announcing, "All communication from this moment on will go through the legal team. Have a good evening." The heavy oak door closed behind me with a decisive click, completely cutting off the past. 6 months later, the cheap flickering neon signs of sterling legacy were taken down, thrown into the scrap heap. On that rotting foundation, the minimalist modern architecture of the ES Collection, a high-end wellness resort chain, was rising. I didn't just wipe out my father's business. I erased the traces of mediocrity and obsolescence he represented. They tried to reach out. Handwritten letters begging, calls from strange numbers at midnight, weak threats via public defenders. All were blocked and crushed by the legal firewall I had erected. Arthur now lives in a rented, run-down apartment in the suburbs, gnawing on his fake glorious past. I stood on my penthouse balcony, the Seattle night wind blowing through my hair, looking down at the city glowing with lights. I didn't feel gloating. I felt light. The sweetest revenge isn't screaming or loud destruction. It is silence. The absolute silence when you realize you no longer need them to define your worth. That night, I didn't lose a family. I found myself. And that freedom, it is more expensive than any check. If you've ever had to stand up against the people who were supposed to love you the most, or if you've ever had to make a tough choice to protect yourself, share your story below. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel, because justice never sleeps, and the truth always needs to be heard. See you in the next story.